Hi everyone, this is Tim. Welcome to North and South podcast. This is an unusual podcast because I kind of did two separate recordings a month apart and then recorded the final one on the 8th of August, but loads has changed. Johnson's gone, etc. But I've kind of merged them and put them both together because I think both together they give a little bit more of an appraisal of what's happened over the last few months with regard to the cost of living crisis. So there's some interesting information in there in terms of analysis and also things that we might do. You know, I desperately want to speak to people who've got good advice to give people on this issue. Please try to follow me on Twitter at North Podcast. If you can contribute the cost of a cup of coffee once a month, it makes a huge difference to me keeping this project moving forward. You can do that at coffee.com. The information is in the podcast notes. Please follow me on Spotify and YouTube. Subscribe. I'm asking you a big favour. Can you share this with 3 people and share it on your social media? And just make sure you subscribe, follow, and do all you can to support this work and getting information out there that can help people. If you want to come on, get involved at any level in producing podcasts, if you've got ideas or you want to come on to the podcast and talk, you want to recommend other people to come on and talk, please get in touch. If you know me personally or through Twitter, let's keep this project moving forward. You are very, very important to this, and without you, I wouldn't be doing it. So people are listening, and I want that to continue because I believe that this is good work. Is there anything else for me to say? Just forgive all the multiple edits that have been part of these two things, and there might be a little bit of overlap and repetition, but just bear with me. As of the 15th of August, the Labour Party have said they're not going to increase the cap on energy from the current price cap as of the 15th of August, which will offset all the big increases that are meant to come in October and January. Whether the Conservative leadership rivals will match that, I doubt it, but it just keeps this kind of debate front and centre. The cost of living crisis is really, really, really hitting people hard in this country. Thank you very much for your support. Enjoy these two little podcasts merged together. And just forgive me if it's a little bit clunky, this one. Thank you. Today I want to talk about the cost of living crisis, which has hit particularly hard over the last year in particular. But these are trends which have been going back for a long time. Now, obviously, you know, Britain, developed country, very lucky to be born in Britain, in a developed country that's, well, to an extent, a parliamentary democracy, but I won't go there with that one today. But since 2007-8, we've had the credit crunch, which has hit people in this country fairly hard. When America sneezes, the rest of the world catches a cold. It wasn't perfect before 2007, still issues with inequality and poverty, child poverty, etc. But it's got a lot worse since then. You could argue that since the war, we've had the welfare state and the Labour government, etc., after the war, which really lifted people. But in the 70s, we then had the oil crisis, and people have said that in terms of actual growth and wage increase, things have been in decline since then. Now, a lot of this depends on who you are, where you're born, who your parents are, you know, what kind of a person you are, etc., etc. There's lots of luck. There's lots of things that may go for or against you. There's the veil of ignorance argument where you plan a society not knowing where you might end up in it, which is a great thought experiment, first written about by John Rawls, the liberal political philosopher. Might have been mentioned by others earlier than that, but it's a great argument. Now, the reason I'm talking about this is it's something I've mentioned before. I want to do more podcasts with people on how they are surviving and what they're doing to survive. Now, some of us might inherit a family home or get a car bought for us by parents, and all this kind of stuff. But basically, I want to know how people are surviving in the UK these days, knowing quite well that with Still quite lucky here. We will spend a certain percentage on food, which is like, I think, at 9-10%. In some parts of the world, they spend 40% on food. We're still very, very lucky in the UK. But we've had the credit crunch since 2007-8. We then had austerity from 10 to 15 in particular, which didn't really help stimulate things. We've had Brexit, which hasn't helped the UK economy. To be honest with you, regardless of your opinions on Brexit, it hasn't helped anyone. Well, it's helped certain people, maybe. Maybe they feel better, but maybe the pockets don't feel better. And we've also had COVID. We've also got a government since 2019 in particular, which just lies through your teeth and is dealing with so many crises because of the incompetence of the leadership in Boris Johnson and, let's be honest, the cabinet. You could probably just walk around on the street and just select people who could do a better job than a lot of the cabinet. They have got their eye elsewhere than the cost of living crisis, and they don't really know what to do. And these are people, a lot of them, who were born very rich and have never known hardship and believe that their ideology is right and that everyone just needs to pull themselves up by the bootstraps and everything will be okay. Now, to some extent, people need to take responsibility for their own lives and people need to help themselves. It's not all about others helping you. You need to help yourself at the end of the day. Now, we can talk about people with disabilities and learning difficulties and people born into terrible circumstances, etc. But the people who are in the top levels of government have not got a clue what the hell is going on. And you've got people like Martin Lewis, who, fair play to Martin Lewis, who's a consumer defender, like literally saying that the cost of living crisis at the moment, we've never seen anything like it. Now, if you're young, trying to buy a house or pay the rent is hard. Although unemployment is low, most of the people on benefits are people who are working. That's not right. Even if it is right, why make people feel bad for claiming benefits then, if that's the way the system works? If we're going to have low unemployment and people aren't going to have any rights in the workplace, and you're going to have these free markets, then why don't you have those things in society to help lift people? This is if you'd even qualify for that support. But with the cost of living crisis going up now, with the cost of food, I mean, my food at the minute, I don't know, is it 40-50% more expensive than a year ago? I think it is. Energy bills, energy prices, yeah, there are ways around that to a degree, but going up and up and up, going up another 800 in September, October. And then, the Chancellor gives us £400. It won't even cover, it'll cover barely 50% of the next increase. So the government basically haven't got a clue what to do, other than drag yourself up by the bootstraps. This kind of like 1920s rugged individualism from those Republican presidents. Haven't got a clue what they are doing. Yes, everything needs to be paid for. Yes, we need to take responsibility on our own lives. But let's give people a chance here, folks. You've got like professionals, people who are working their socks off and they can't afford basic bills. I lived in a home not long ago. I don't want to go too much into my personal circumstances. Literally, two of us working could not balance the books. We didn't do anything. We didn't go out and spend money on expensive things. So, I don't know what the answer is, but I want to start speaking to people who are experts in financial survival, who've got stories to tell about financial survival, who can come on and help people who are listening on how they can save money and what options are out there, alternative lifestyle, alternative ways of living. If you think through the ballot box you're going to get any meaningful change, good luck to you. Even if we get a Labour government at the next one, because Johnson, becomes so narcissistic, Machiavellian and psychopathic, even more than he is now. He just inflates so much that he just explodes in some big cloud of self-love. Let's imagine he goes and another Tory comes in and they win another election. Even if we get Labour, what can Labour do with things this bad? What can Labour do? They might be able to do a few cosmetic things, help a few things here and there. So you can wait a million years for new governments and for things to change. You've got to change it yourself. And I want to empower people to change things as individuals and as groups. So I want to speak to people who've got stories to tell in terms of financial survival, turning their lives around, taking on new ideas, and just trying to find their way in the world where it's becoming increasingly difficult. So that's a new theme for North and South podcast. So please get in touch. Put me in touch with people who you think might want to come on, who've got a story to tell. I want to speak to people in any walk of life in terms of their survival and keeping their head above water, and advice to help people who are genuinely struggling. Cheers, folks. See you later. Okay, that was the first episode. This next bit is the second episode. Thank you. We've also got the Ukraine thing going on at the minute, which isn't helping with food and energy prices. That has been particularly damaging. There was an old saying, wasn't there, that no two countries with a McDonald's can ever go to war. But when things are quiet, always get people who upset the apple cart and make things worse, who are unpredictable. For example, Vladimir Putin and his invasion of the Ukraine, which was a huge shock. And when I first heard it, that he was going for the capital, I was like, no, who's advised them of that? And it's all gone wrong for them. But now they're retreating to that guerrilla warfare area. Now they've got the food production going again, apparently coming out of Ukraine, which is the breadbasket of the world. But there's going to be tensions in the Ukraine region for a long, long time. COVID may well settle down. We've had the first 2 years. Do you reckon that these things go on for about 4 years based on historical comparisons with the Spanish flu, etc.? So that might be going on for a while. And also the impacts of COVID will be going on for a while as well. And then, of course, you've got Brexit, which I think we're going to have to put up with because it's identity politics, isn't it? People who voted for Brexit don't like admitting that it's been awful. It's like the big lie in America that Trump won the election. We've got our version is that Brexit is good for the UK. I think the evidence speaks for itself, and I think we knew all about this, didn't we, before it happened. It would have been nice if before Brexit they would have actually explained what Brexit was instead of saying, yeah, let's leave the European Union. And then you had all the Brexiteers saying, oh yeah, we'll stay in the customs union and the single market, but we can leave the political institutions, so then you've got no say. Then he said, oh, we'll do what Switzerland or Norway do, and then we've said, no, we're leaving completely. And then you've got a government which has been elected on getting Brexit done, lying through its teeth. What damage to the socio-economic, politico-cultural fabric Brexit has caused. Totally self-inflicted. And those people who pushed for it and who were still defending it, hold your heads in shame. Hold your heads in shame. Okay, I'll try to stop alienating people now who've just switched off and have called me a Ramona and woke. Right, the Bank of England has said recently that there's 13% inflation, but poorer people are probably experiencing something in the region of 30% inflation, because in poorer areas, particularly in the north, there's poor insulation in older homes, and people often need a car just to do the basics, like get to and from particular things in areas which are not well served by public transport. Don't get me started on the condition of public transportation in this country relative to other parts of Europe. That's for another episode. We know Rishi Sunak has been going to places like Tunbridge Wells saying, oh, we don't want to just be giving money to the poorer areas with the Levelling Up agenda. We want to be helping Tunbridge Wells too. Thanks, Rishi. Although he's probably preferable to the other one, Liz Truss, who is genuinely terrifying. And I genuinely believe I could do a better job than her. Genuinely believe that if I was the Prime Minister of this country, I could do a better job than her if they just took me down to London now, gave me the keys to number 10 and said, get in there and get started. I think I could do a better job. which is saying something. We're going to have an election soon. It's ongoing, isn't it, at the moment? As I release this podcast, or sorry, as I record this podcast, you may well know who the leader is by the time you hear this. But basically, the next prime minister is going to be decided by 100,000 to 160,000 weirdos who are members of the Conservative Party, and what Sunak and Truss have been saying, it's a bit like, there's three elephants in the room and they're talking about other things like culture war and all this nonsense without looking at the real issues. It's quite sad, really. And I suppose it's not just the legacy of Boris, I think it's the legacy of Brexit and this kind of post-truth dimension to British politics. Although I would say that Truss is the continuity candidate for Boris. Although whenever she does an interview, she may well get better as she grows into the job, but whenever she does an interview, I just put me head in my hands and just close my eyes and cringe. So we'll see what happens there, because she's meant to be the one who's going to win. 51% of the UK population are apparently cutting gas and electricity usage. Over 55s are doing it more so. It's not winter yet, so how that's going to pan out as vulnerable people go into the winter is another thing entirely. And let's be honest, it's not just vulnerable people who are going to be struggling. It's people who might consider themselves quite comfortable are going to be really struggling with this. Many people are going to be deciding between eating or heating. Now that food banks are just considered another part of modern British society, maybe like many people within government, the particularly privileged people who happen to form the current government, maybe they don't really know what it's like to choose between eating and heating, but we know this and people keep voting them in. About 16 million people are struggling with basic essentials such as groceries, it's estimated. About 11 million are dipping into savings. I've been dipping into my savings since 2019. I have just been unable to keep my head above water, and with this at the moment, I think it's quite depressing to think about it. And I think even in homes with like apparently so-called professionals, etc., this is the case. 40% of disabled people are struggling, it's estimated, and people who earn between 10 and 15,000 a year are cutting back on food. Half of all renters are really struggling, and another ticking time bomb is the inability of young people to buy housing, because we've got no social housing. We have got a real supply issue in this country, which is good for people who've already got property, who tend to be over 45, 50, and who tend to vote and might be more inclined to read the Daily Mail and the Daily Telegraph, etc. But again, that's another story entirely. But young people are being severely let down by this country in terms of their basic ability to get on the housing ladder. And I don't think we're going to become a more European-like place where it's considered okay for people to just rent right through life, because you need to be able to afford to rent right through life. And the current rental market in this country is exorbitant and out of the reach of the average person. I don't know how people are surviving at the moment. 57% have reduced non-essentials, and there is also pressure on relationships from all this long waiting lists for counselling. I know that for myself, as someone with 3 kids who's a renter, I've been dipping into my savings since 2019. 2 so-called professionals in the house. My partner went on maternity leave. Then maternity leave ended during COVID, so she couldn't go back to work and there was no pay. But I was at least getting paid throughout COVID as a teacher. We have 2 cars in the family, and that's our only option. We cannot get to work and do what we need to do without those 2 cars. And some people might say, well, that's a real luxury to be in that position. And I do accept that. but we basically can't really buy or do anything. That was the situation for us leading up to last October. In October of 2022, the price cap for energy is going to go to £3,600 a year. 3 years ago, it was 1,254. Now, some people are talking about a social fund in this country whereby people who are wealthier pay to help poorer families with their energy bills. Doesn't sound very British, that, particularly with the current government, but that's one option that could be done. Also, we've got the example of France, where 4% energy increases, it's being capped at 4%. So the French are saying, no, sorry, we can't make our citizens pay more because they're already struggling. Plus, the French don't take these things lying down, whereas we tend to be a little bit more supine in the UK and do whatever our lords tell us to do. Maybe we could lower the price cap and keep it a lot lower. Of course, this would upset the Conservative philosophy and letting corporations and the markets sort things out. We have done a windfall tax. Labour suggested it, and then the Tories finally did it, but it wasn't quite a windfall tax. We've got BP and Shell making record profits while we're all struggling. And again, that's another podcast, but what can you say? So in France, the government has set up merged utility companies to compete in France with the private sector, and they took over EDF. And inflation is currently in France at 5.8%, while it's at 13% on this side of the channel. But of course, we don't do what the French do. You know, that's socialism and Marxism and communism, and that doesn't work. In terms of food, yeah, people might go to Aldi and Lidl and places like that, and then maybe go to other supermarkets to get the luxuries. Petrol, I just don't know where to begin with petrol. I mean, maybe in the future green cars will be cheaper and it'll be a bit less expensive, but the cost of petrol, people basically use cars because it's efficient and people are working all the hours God sends. We've got very low wages in this country, low unemployment, but because of that low wages, and people are really struggling. This idea that people can just go on our very limited public transport to get from A to B. Again, these are long-term structural problems. Bills, there's websites like Uswitch you can go on to see what the best rate is for different things like car insurance. I use that regularly. Also, in terms of energy, you've got to get smart, pay by direct debit, and shop around for energy and utilities. I do something called bundling, and I'm just going to declare that I actually am a distributor for a company called Utility Warehouse, but it only benefits me if I sign people up. So I'm just going to say, check out Utility Warehouse and do online quotes. And even better, bundle it together so you're paying for internet, phones, home insurance and energy through the one supplier. We have a few other perks at Utility Warehouse. And get your bill locked down, ideally on a fixed rate that takes into account the increase in the price cap, and get it locked down at a good deal that offsets some of the worst things about the price increase. There's a lot of people who are saying that they're not going to pay their energy bills moving forward, and the government, of course, think that that's not right because that's breaking the law. And of course, this government doesn't break the law by going to parties and rewriting the Northern Ireland Protocol, but that's not what we do in Britain. We don't break the law when we're getting walked all over by people who are out of touch. It is very hard to balance the books, but get interested, and in these hard times, get smart. And many people have a big distrust of everything and everyone, but there are deals out there and things you can do if you're smart. And again, it's hard. People have got kids. It's very time consuming. It can be very, very difficult indeed. In Italy for years now, people have been living in what you might call the bean pole family. I think that's the right phrase. And it's the idea of like different generations living together. So you care for the elderly help look after the young. Obviously, you need to build your house a bit and this might be something that happens moving forward because of the ridiculous cost of housing in this country. I don't think the government are going to do much about that. It also doesn't help that we've got a government that's been effectively in crisis since 2019. Even if you're a Johnson fan, you've got to admit he's completely incompetent and a buffoon, and it's been absolute chaos. And even if you like him because he's giving you your Brexit, or you think he's funny or whatever, you wouldn't have him in charge of any business or organisation. Yeah, it's okay to put him in charge of government. In many ways, you might say, oh yeah, put him in charge of government and he picks the right people to actually do the spade work, but he didn't. He picked loyalists and Brexiteers, and we've probably got the worst cabinet that we've ever had in certainly modern British history. And then if you look over the pond at Trump, look at the people who he picked. Anyone with any integrity he got rid of. Maybe some people kept him in check by not necessarily following his orders, but this idea that when you have this like populist idiot at the top who basically you wouldn't leave in charge of your dog for an hour, that they are good at running the country, please look at yourselves in the mirror. We've also got all this culture war nonsense. So, you know, people raging about trans rights and the Edward Colston statue getting knocked down and the Rwanda issue. And all I can say is, if you can't see through that, then that's down to you. You know, just educate your kids, get educated, get on board with things and see through the mirage of nonsense. I'm not saying it's for everyone, politics, getting into politics, but to not be interested in politics is a very profound political decision to make, and maybe that's the way it's meant to be. Labour Party, not particularly impressed by Starmer. He's very cautious, but that's another story. Labour have said that they would cut VAT on fuel, and they've recommended the government, Gordon Brown's recommended the government make an emergency budget. Don't think the Tories are going to go for that. York University has said that 11.6 million people spend more than a quarter of their income on fuel. Renewables, etc. We've missed the boat with that in the past, which might have meant we were more independent of the foreign market, etc. Although even the right are now saying that climate change is real, but they're just saying, oh, but we can't do anything about it, and they're dragging their feet with that as well, just like the tobacco companies have done in the past. 3 million people are spending 30% or more on fuel, which is not sustainable. Very difficult. It might be 3 million households, spending more than 30% on fuel, which is bad. Loughborough University has said that some families are about 1,600 worse off a year. Now, the government have said they're going to help, but it's not going to cover those kinds of losses. People are significantly poorer right across the system. And we've got the example of France, but again, I don't think our government are willing to do it. Interestingly enough, when you say to them about like the environment and saving the environment for future generations, they're not interested. However, when it comes to like spending money now, which means that the future generations will have more debt, but it's manageable government debt, that's a big moral issue for people like Rishi Sunak. Oh no, we can't indebt the future, we need to balance the books. Osborne said it as well. But of course, government books are not like household budgets. The government can borrow cheaply, and the government can spend big money on things like we did during COVID. We do need to be smart, but this is a cost of living crisis that is affecting everyone. And if you can't do it now, then when are you going to do it? Universal credit could be raised because everything that we've been offered is being gobbled up. That's just for the people on universal credit. And shock horror, most people on universal credit, I think it might even be 2/3, are working in this fantastic low wage, low unemployment economy. The public in a recent survey as well have said that they're not overly keen on tax cuts, which Liz Truss has been pushing. Of course, basic economics suggests that if you cut taxes, that can lead to more inflation because people are spending more. And it's probably better to get people paying less for the basics rather than trying to cut their taxes. But of course, Truss is just trying to win the Conservative leadership contest she's speaking to her base. Ironically, even Conservative voters, though, are saying that they are not overly keen on tax cuts at the moment overall. But of course, it's Conservative members who Truss is trying to appeal to in her alternative world that she lives in, which is reminiscent of Marie Antoinette before the French Revolution, going around in her little village of Versailles pretending to be a pastoral peasant. Thank you very much indeed, Liz Truss, for your efforts. Right, I think that's me just with a little bit of a discussion about the cost of living crisis. But I just want to say out there, people, that you're not alone. It's very difficult at the moment. Things are hard. Try and speak to others about ways that you can save money, get sensible, look at your options, and we'll get through it. You know, the Blitz spirit, stiff upper lip. We will get through it, but we'll get through it together. And we'll get through it by getting people who represent us, who actually care. So think very carefully about who you support, who you vote for, what you're involved in. You know where I stand on all this in terms of who I believe in and what kind of politics I believe in. And I do feel that we are really, really being let down at the moment. I hope you find this a little bit useful to hear some of that information, to know that there is other ways, that we might not necessarily get them from this government, and we might not get them from the opposition either, but there are other ways, and together we can come together and make the world a better place. It starts with you, but we then work on what groups we're affiliated with and look to see how we can positively change the society that we're in. So stick together, look after yourselves, look after your loved ones and the vulnerable, and just remember that we're not living in a rehearsal. So try and enjoy every day and try and look after yourselves. I'm going to quote the Bible. I think it's in Matthew that says, if God can find food for the birds and the bees and the animals, something like that, then he'll find food for us as well. And I know that some cities are saying that everyone has got the basic right to food. They're trying to introduce that, some councils, etc. So maybe in the future that right will be enshrined. In the meantime, let's keep the faith, let's get there, and let's make this country a better place. Stay strong, folks.